أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وآله الطيبين الطاهرين اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. Respected brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. We will start our discussion of Nahjul Balagha this evening by examining one very interesting passage in sermon number 14. We have two versions of the book, so the page numbers may be different, but the number of the sermon is 14. I think in the first edition that we have is maybe page 137. In your edition, what? 192. 192. So 137 in the old one and 192 in the new one. And that is sermon number 14. It starts with, your land is close to the sea. Is that what you have? In sermon? Your grounds are close to the sea. Yes. أَرْضُكُمْ قَرِيبَةٌ مِّنَ الْمَاءِ. That's the sermon we're examining. In sermon number 14 and also sermon number 13, the previous one, Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam is speaking about the city of Basra, which is in southern Iraq, right on the Persian Gulf. The Imam alayhi salam is critical of the city because of the negative role that they played against the Imam alayhi salam in mobilizing a massive army to fight the successor to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, to fight the most just leader after the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So the Imam is very critical of the people of Basra. In this sermon, sermon 14, the Imam mentioned something interesting. I would like to stop at this phrase and kind of use modern science to better understand the words of the Imam. The Imam rebukes the people of Basra at the time, and the Imam says, even your geography is a bad geography. Even your climate is a corrupt climate that makes your intellect shallow. So the Imam alayhi salam starts this sermon by stating, أَرْضُكُمْ قَرِيبَةٌ مِّنَ الْمَاءِ. Your land is close to water. Well, technically it's close to water because it's right on the Persian Gulf. It's very close to the sea, the Persian Gulf Sea. Number two, the elevation of Basra is also pretty low. So it's not a land that is considered high. It's very low. The elevation of it is pretty low, so it's close to water. بَعِيدَةٌ مِّنَ السَّمَاءِ. It's far away from the sky. A lot of scholars have stated that this is a figure of speech, meaning it's far from the rahmah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala due to your sins and corruption, and even the geography of it is a tough geography. The climate is not such a helpful climate. Then the Imam states, خَفَّتْ عُقُولُكُمْ. خَفَّت is a past tense verb that comes from the word khafif. In Arabic, what does khafif mean? Light. Your brains or your intellect became light. What does that mean when you tell someone your intellect is light or your brain is light? What are you trying to tell this person? You're not so smart. You're not very smart. You're not really using your brain. You're very shallow in your thinking. Now, a number of scholars have examined this statement by the Imam alayhi salam, and they're trying to make sense of it. How is it that the Imam is describing the people of Basra as having a light brain, having a light intellect? They're not that intelligent, they're not that smart, they get fooled easily. Like Talha and Zubair and Aisha, they fooled them very easily. Why is that the case? A number of scholars have examined, since the Imam is describing the geography and location, that it's close to water, it has low elevation, that the geography of the place that you live in has an impact on your IQ, on your intelligence, and even on your thinking. And it's truly mesmerizing that 14 centuries ago, Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam makes a note of this. At a time where there was really no sense of proper geography. There was no science for climate, to know the impact of climate on the brain, on how you think. So the Imam alayhi salam, for him to make this observation about the people of Basra, that's just fascinating. So the Imam says, okay, your brains are impacted by all of this. It makes you light in your thinking. You're shallow in your intellect. Let's see what modern science has said. So we find that there are two factors that impact IQ, temperature and humidity. What is the impact of temperature on mental performance? So a number of studies, like a new study by Harvard University, has found that extreme heat makes it harder to think. In extreme heat, you cannot fully concentrate or think. And it's really fascinating what this study found about the role of temperature. Another study from Lawrence Berkeley National Lab found that when office temperatures rise above the mid-70s, 75 and higher, workers' performance goes down. So the ideal temperature is between 70 to 75, let's say. 70 to 72 is the perfect temperature to be productive in your mental capacity. When the temperature rises above 75, becomes 80, 85, 90, 100, workers' performance goes down. Now that's the role of temperature by itself. What about humidity? When you factor in humidity, what happens? Well, scientific studies have shown that weather conditions like high temperature and humidity can impair mental performance because it affects the brain's neurochemistry. And the way that it affects it is the following, to simplify it. When the body is trying to cool off, it sends blood to the surface of the skin. And it pulls water from the bloodstream and it sends it to the skin so the skin can, stay hydrated and you can cool down. Well, what does that do? That speeds dehydration and leaves less blood available to carry oxygen to the brain. So now you have less of a supply of oxygen being delivered to the brain. And because the blood will also have less water, it will become more difficult for the blood to also circulate in areas where you have high temperature and high humidity. That's what happens to the body. Another study by the Scientific American demonstrated that it takes more energy to cool your body when it's hot than it does to warm it up when you're cold. See, if it's cold, your body needs to use energy to warm it up. But when it's hot, it needs to spend more energy to cool you down. Why? Why is that the case? Because energy comes from glucose, right? And what's the food of the brain? Glucose. The most important nutrient or food for the brain is really glucose. Now, when your body, in trying to cool down, is using that glucose, it's actually stealing that food from the brain. So it physically impacts the brain. So there are these very, very interesting studies that show how the climate can impact the brain. And therefore, you find that research shows within the United States, we have different climates, right? Those states with cooler temperatures tend to have populations with higher IQs. This is not just a claim, this is proven by scientific research. States that are warmer and there's more humidity, right? In those states, the IQ of the general population tends to be a little bit lower. What about living in coastal areas? Today we know that the prime property, the best location is on the coast. If you're in California, in Florida, in any state and you're on the coast, land is very expensive there. People would like a nice, beautiful house on the beach, on the ocean. but it does come with consequences. Why? Because coastal areas are more humid than inland areas. So the first effect of living in a coastal area is that people perspire more. Why? Because with higher humidity, you feel that it's hotter. And so your body needs to cool itself down more. And so you start perspiring more. Now, in areas that are hot but dry, you quickly perspire because it evaporates very quickly. And because it evaporates very quickly, it gives you that cooling effect. Have you seen something when it evaporates, it leaves a cooling effect? And if you want to try it, just put some water on your hand, let your hands become wet, and then blow on your hand. It starts evaporating. You feel a cooling effect, right? That's natural. So in these areas where the humidity is lower, it's dry heat, that sweat or the perspiration quickly evaporates, giving you a sense of relief, so your body needs to work less. But in areas where it's very humid, muggy outside, you start perspiring a lot. So those people who actually live by the coast, they're impacted by the humidity, and it impacts the brain, especially if the temperature is a little bit high. So we find that historically, people would stay away from the coast. In the past, living on the beach, on the coast was not a prime location. People would avoid that. Look at the world capitals, for instance. Rome is away from the coast, London, Paris, Tehran, so many of these main cities in countries where they do have a coast, but they tend to go a little bit inland for a number of reasons. One is storms. Remember, back then people had no conception of modern weather and meteorology. So if a storm, a hurricane, something's coming from the sea, it could easily destroy them. They would keep away from the sea. What's the other reason?
I think the other reason, because in the past there was no airplanes, so like the Nahjul,
exactly. That's the second reason. The second reason is when the naval forces of your enemy would make an attack, they would come from sea. So it would not make sense for you to build your capital or your most important city, unless it was a port city and that was necessary, on the sea. Go a little bit inland, and that was a way to protect yourself. This was in the past. Now today, of course, things have changed. Now look at the city of Basra. Does anybody know anything about the climate of Basra?
It's hot and humid.
It's one of the hottest cities on the face of the planet. One of the hottest cities in the face of the planet. The temperature is just mind-boggling. That whole region, from Basra to Kuwait, that is one of the hottest regions. I'm not saying it's the hottest. You can find some records in Death Valley, California, and I don't know, some places of Africa, but it's one of the hottest cities on earth. So that's number one. The temperature is extremely high. Number two, what is it that differentiates Basra from other Iraqi cities, like Najaf, Baghdad, Karbala? Najaf is also hot. Temperature-wise, Najaf is not any cooler than Basra. But what's different about Basra than Najaf?
Dry climate.
Exactly. Najaf is dry heat. Mecca is dry heat. Sometimes you may have days of humidity, but for the most part, it's dry. Medina is dry heat. Basra is very humid. The humidity in that Persian Gulf region can be a killer sometimes. So when you have temperatures of 120 degrees Fahrenheit and humidity, you can just imagine. So the Imam ﷺ says, your geography is like a curse on you. And it's impacting your mental judgment. خَفَّتْ عُقُولُكُمْ. Even your brains, your IQ, your intelligence, your intellect is becoming light because of this geography. And so this is actually a warning not to live in these areas. These areas, really have an impact. If you look at, recent history, before this new modern technology, you found the most productive cities are those cities that are away from extreme heat and humidity. Colder climates. Look at here in the United States, when America was settled. Where do you have the most productive universities that were established? In colder states or warm, hot states? What do you say, based on what you know about the geography of some of these and the location of some of these universities? Cooler states, right? Yes, there is also another factor where the settlers first settled, but remember, they quickly spread. But those important universities were established in these areas. And even until today, these universities do better than others in warmer climates. It has an effect. It's just a simple effect of the climate and how you can study and concentrate and be productive. So colder climates are a lot more productive. And if you want further proof, look at the countries today and historically that are closer to the equator. Hotter countries closer to the equator. Do you find very productive countries with strong economies, with strong foundations in these areas of the world, or they're generally second or third world countries? What is it that you notice and observe? If you have a sense of geography and where these countries are located. If you examine those countries that are hot and humid, closer to the equator, the productivity is much less. And historically they've been that way. Because that climate does impact you. So the Imam ﷺ in this beautiful sermon, in critiquing the people of Basra and giving his observations, the Imam is even making a note of the geography of this place. Even the climate has an impact. So don't live in such an area if you don't have to. Ardullahi wasa', the land of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is vast. Now by the way, with modern technology, this effect is not that pronounced anymore. Because today we have what? AC. You know, even if you live in Florida, a lot of times you're not out there exposed to that heat and humidity. You've got the AC at work, at school, in the comfort of your house. That is reducing the humidity and the heat. So with our modern technology, it's not that of a risk to live in these areas anymore, because you're no longer exposed to the outside weather. But remember, in the era right before this modern technology, before the AC systems came in, where people were directly impacted by the weather outside, this had a huge effect on them. And so this is a very, very interesting observation from Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam 14 centuries ago, when honestly there was no conception of these ideas, of what the climate and the humidity can do to your mental capacity. The Imam makes this interesting observation about the city of Basra. Any thoughts, reflections? I just wanted to share with you this passage in this short sermon, just to highlight how amazing our Imams are. From every aspect, you know, they are well versed in these sciences. Yes, sister.
Sayyid, when I was in Karbala 2 years ago, it was during the summer. It was really, really hot, very humid. So I can imagine a long time ago, like when we used to get to...
What you witnessed in Karbala is nothing to the Persian Gulf area. Nothing compared to that. Nothing compared to Basra and Kuwait and some of these areas. In maybe August, late July, August,
I was in late July.
Yeah. So Karbala is a lot better.
So how did they live?
Because Karbala is more of dry heat. There is some humidity from the farmlands, from the palm farms that exist in that area, but for the most part it's dry heat. Even in Iran, most of Iran is dry heat. From Mashhad to Tehran to Qom, it's dry heat. Yeah. But that Persian Gulf area is humid heat. The relative humidity is very, very high. And that has an impact. It's an interesting observation from the Imam. Any question?
I was just curious about the evolution of interpretation or tafsir of Imam Ali alayhi salam's words. So like, did the scholars over time further elaborate on these things and uncover the words? How did that
That's a very good question. The evolution of understanding these texts. Even the Quran, that's applicable to the Quran. Every day we get a modern, new understanding of some Quranic verses that were not known to most people in the past. We know that the Imams of Ahlul Bayt, and of course on top of them the Holy Prophet ﷺ, they were rich in knowledge from every aspect. So their words are so accurate. They have multiple dimensions. They have an apparent simple meaning that anybody could understand at that time, but they have deeper layers and deeper meanings. Now, historically, when the scholars looked at a statement like that from the Imam, they knew the Imam was pointing out something about Basra's geography. قَرِيبَةٌ مِنَ الْمَاءِ. So he's talking about geographical elements. It's close to water, it's away from the sky, and therefore your intellect has become light. They knew there was something that the Imam was pointing out about that geography that was negative. But yes, if you look at the commentary of early scholars on Nahjul Balagha, they were not so clear on what the Imam was saying. They're like, the Imam is pointing out something here, but it's not so clear. What does he mean close to water, far from the sky, and the impact that has on the intellect? They could not figure it out or break it down. So for centuries, of course, they believe in the words of the Imam, and they know he's pointing out something about the geography, but they just couldn't grasp it. In our modern times, once we have a better understanding of geography and how it impacts the thinking, then scholars are saying, okay, now it makes sense what the Imam is saying. Now it's clear to us how that's impacting, people's intellect, because we understand now what temperature does, what humidity does, and Basra is a city that suffers from high temperature and high humidity. So the understanding of hadiths and verses does evolve over time. But here's the key. Sometimes people, using a new study, will insert their opinion into a text that the text is not really talking about. That's something that the hadiths prohibit us from doing. If there's no clear indication that the verse of the Quran or the hadith is talking about that, keep away from inserting your own opinion. But sometimes the general idea is clear. The details of it are not clear. Science can uncover the details. See, in our example, it's clear the Imam's talking about what? Is he talking about history? No. Is he talking about something social? Something that has to do with the family? Something? No. The Imam's talking about geography. Ardukum, your land, is close to water. Whenever you use words like land, water, you're talking about what? Geography. So we know that the Imam is talking within the realm of geography. Science can help you understand the details of it. But for someone to come up their own interpretation, go out of their way to make that a Quranic application, that's something the hadith does prohibit us from doing. Because now it's just speculation. Who says the verse is talking about that? Well, modern science says X. Okay, modern science does say that. But how did you make the conclusion that the verse is exactly talking about that? Drawing such conclusions is dangerous. Unless it's clear what the verse is saying. It's clear that the verse is addressing this particular topic. Now the details of that topic you can borrow from modern science to better understand it.
And so what scholar in today's time, or what is the latest interpretation in Arabic that is reliable, would you say?
So today, the commentaries on Nahjul Balagha, that is more modern, that does sometimes refer to some scientific aspects, is called Nafahat al-Wilaya by the scholar Al-Sheikh Nasir Makarim Shirazi. He's one of the Maraja and Qom, and he has a commentary on Nahjul Balagha. He usually does borrow some of these scientific terms or ideas, just like he does in his tafsir work, which is called Al-Amthal. Some of it has been translated into English, the tafsir, but not all of it. Originally it was in Farsi, it's called Tafsir Nimuna. In Urdu I think it's also called Tafsir Nimuna, possibly, but in Arabic it's called Tafsir Al-Amthal. So even in that tafsir you'll find him making some of these scientific references, but acceptable, something that is accepted by most scholars. And if he's not sure, he'll just mention it as a possibility. It's possible that the following verse could be talking about the scientific principle. Any other thoughts about this sermon and the geography of Basra before we move on to the next sermon?
I have a small comment. Why, as a Muslim, we always wait till the West found something in science, then we say, okay, we have it in Quran or we have it in our hadith. Why don't we go and discover that before?
Why is it that Muslims wait for the West to discover something and they say, okay, that's what the Quran and Hadith means? For centuries, that wasn't the case. When Muslims were the pioneers of math, science, geography, medicine, you name it. They were making these discoveries and better understanding the Quran and Hadith. For centuries, when Europe was in the Dark Ages and the Middle Ages, Muslims were in the front lines. Yes, in the last 3 centuries, we see the rise of science in the West and the fall of science in the Muslim worlds because of despotic governments, because of Muslims who unfortunately abandoned knowledge and education and science. So when Muslims knew the value of science and education, they were at the top. And they were the first to understand this, not borrowing anything from anyone. But in the last 3 centuries, once Muslim societies unfortunately moved away from education, moved away from science, due to a number of factors, historical and political and social, then the discoveries are being made in the West.
Well, we have so many Muslims lives in the West, and they are so many knowledgeable, and they can find the ratio.
Well, first of all, the ratio of Muslims living in the West in the scientific fields is relatively less. It's more new with recent immigration. It's new, the last few decades. Whereas the scientific revolution in the West is 3 centuries old in reality. So it's natural that you'll have less Muslims in those fields. Yes, it's increasing. We do see that, for instance, in the United States, according to some surveys, the average Muslim in the US is more educated than Americans. And so maybe they're more productive in that field.
We don't have like special field and the Marja'i and Qom or Iraq's like science or modern science that they list the things that they think we should go.
In colleges in the Middle East itself, there are some. There are some colleges, whether in Tehran or in other areas, that actually do try to make these discoveries. Yes, definitely. But in the West, they probably don't have enough resources to fund something like that. Or they may not have a system in place yet in order to organize an effort like that in Western universities. But in the Middle East, there are a number of universities. Day and night, they're publishing research. Yes, mainly it's in Farsi or Arabic, and it's not that accessible to us yet. But there are publications in Iran that I've seen. Every single day, you'll see scientists over there, medical doctors, engineers, making discoveries and drawing parallels between these discoveries and hadiths or Quran. So it's there, alhamdulillah. Yes, it should be more, and more attention should be paid to that aspect. But we do have. Yes, obviously it's not going to get global coverage. Remember, the media plays a role. They try to downplay a lot of these discoveries. So remember, there's a lobby against them too.
And there is a war, like always wars, it drain the country.
And in a lot of these Middle Eastern countries, that's true. There's war, there's political crisis, and that shifts attention away from these discoveries and universities. And remember, with instability, you have what's called brain drain. So if you look at, for example, here in the US, some of these top scientists at NASA in medical fields are Iranian, just to give you an example. But because of instability the last century, really, in Iran, the Shahs who came afterwards, and then the war that Iraq waged on Iran during that crisis, and then the sanctions and a number of other problems in the Middle East, many of them, they just find an opportunity outside. Let's immigrate and go and work for another university. That's a challenge as well. So they do the research there, and then they come here, they become secular, and they forget about religion. That does happen. Unfortunately, that does happen. Let's now go to Sermon 15. It's a very short sermon, 2 lines. We have sources such as one hadith attributed to Ibn Abbas. Ibn Abbas is the son of Abbas, the uncle of the Prophet. He's a respected companion. One hadith attributed to Ibn Abbas says that this sermon was made the next day after Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam received the allegiance from people. So the next day after he was recognized as the Khalifa of the Muslimin, when people gave the bay'ah and the allegiance to him. In this sermon, the Imam alayhi salam issues a stern warning to all those who unjustly got property from public funds because they were connected to Uthman the Caliph. If you remember from last year, the Shiqqiya sermon, Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam highlighted the corruption of the Umayyads, and the mismanagement that Uthman did. Remember, Uthman had taken so many lands unjustly and he had given it to his relatives. Remember when he brought back Al-Hakam ibn al-As, whom the Prophet had exiled, he welcomed him back and he gave him 100,000 dirhams, and so many other people like that. Nepotism, discrimination. So what Uthman had done, he had taken pieces of property which should belong to Muslims and the public treasury, Bayt Mal al-Muslimin, and he would give it to those elite who were well connected with him or they were his relatives from the Bani Umayyah. The Imam is issuing a warning that these pieces of property, don't think they're yours. Just because Uthman gave those lands to you that you now own them, I will take them back and I will give it to its rightful owners. So the Imam here is announcing a sense of justice. Finally, after Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, people could breathe justice. So there was a sense of relief for all those people who were marginalized, impoverished. Finally, we get our rights. Finally, favoritism is over, nepotism is over. Our economic conditions are going to get better because we will get equal rights. And remember, the revolutionaries who attacked Uthman and assassinated him, they reached a boiling point. So the Imam also had to calm them down, because revolutionaries, if you don't calm them down, they create havoc in society. So by issuing the sermon, the Imam ﷺ was just calming everyone down and telling them and assuring them that I will establish justice. Anything that was wrongfully taken during the era of Uthman, I will give it back. So the Imam ﷺ says, Wallahi, I swear by the Almighty God. This is an infallible Imam taking an oath. Remember, in Islamic law, it's makruh, unrecommended, to take an oath in God's name. Something belongs to you. Imagine this marker belongs to me. Somebody challenges me. No, this marker is not yours. I say, no, it's mine. No, it's not yours. Now I say, no, wallahi, it's mine. Is that haram to say? If it really is yours? No. Is it recommended?
No.
It's unrecommended. Why? It's a true statement. It's mine. See, Allah's name is sacred. Don't bring God's name with a material object. It's not appropriate. Have respect for the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Sometimes the Imams of Ahlul Bayt would be challenged with their property, belongings, and they would be asked, take an oath in God to prove your claim. The Imam would say no. Even if it means I lose my claim, I lose my property, I'm not going to bring God's name for a personal matter. Okay. How come Imam Ali alayhi salam starts the sermon by taking an oath on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala?
Unless something really.
He was pushed to that point.
Well, if it's makruh, just make the statement that I will establish justice. I'll return your belongings. Why does he bring God's name?
Not everybody will belong to God. This money is belonging.
This is haqq. Yes, brother. Not everybody will believe him. So when the Imam is making the sermon about justice, divine justice, in reality the Imam is saying, I'm upholding the system of God. And through the system of Allah, I will guarantee your rights. So when you're talking about God's system, then you can bring Allah's name. Because you're not using His name for a personal matter. You're using Allah's name for Allah's system, for justice, which is an instruction by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In these areas, it's perfectly appropriate to mention God's name. Especially if you want people to believe that this is the system of God. Yes, brother.
Nowadays, saying a statement without saying Wallah is going to be invalid. If you don't say Wallah, you're not.
And that's a very negative culture and habit that a lot of people have. Because Allah's name is sanctified. We shouldn't have the habit of saying Wallah. And one of the reasons why in Hajj and Ihram, if you say Wallah, you have to pay a sheep. Did you know that? There's a kafara for saying Wallah when you're in Ihram. Because that's training you. The name of Allah is so sacred. Don't mention it on these worldly things. So yes, people have that habit. We need to stop that habit.
How do we fix it?
First of all, let people know, talk to them about these verses and hadiths. Some people don't know. They have not heard these verses or hadiths. Tell them this is inappropriate. And then keep reminding them, over time, if enough of us do that, we can change that, negative culture or habit of saying wallah with every statement.
What if you say, I swear to God?
Same idea, yeah. If it's a personal, petty issue, it's not appropriate. Yes, if it's about religion, about justice, about something important that affects everyone, that's okay. But personal matters, it's not appropriate. Yeah, it's not appropriate because you're bringing God's name for this personal issue. And you're taking an oath for that personal issue. That makes people take God lightly. And that's not appropriate. And remember, with personal issues like that, people, most of the time, they're lying and exaggerating. So when you open that door, a lot of these oaths, believe me, half of these, I don't have official statistics, I'm just saying, half of these wallahs are not truthful. That's the reality, because people's words, a lot of them are not truthful. And if there's a wallah with every sentence, you can automatically deduce that a lot of this is not truthful, or it's exaggerations. So automatically now you've taken God lightly. Only say it when you're 100% sure what you're saying is accurate and it's important. That way you show respect to the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Imagine, let me give you an example. Who do you consider someone very respected in your life? Someone you look up to? Who? No, seriously, someone who... Your father, your parents, your teacher, right? A scholar. Imagine if you're fighting with your friend over this pen, okay? And then you go and you bring your teacher, you drag your teacher or your elderly father and tell him, I want you to witness that this little pen that's worth 50 cents is mine. Is that appropriate to do? No, that's not appropriate to do. The teacher will say, such a petty issue, you come and bring my name and make me a witness here, come on. So you get the idea, right? Now imagine the King of Kings, Allah, the one who created you. So the Imam starts his sermon by saying, Wallahi. That waw in Arabic is called wawil qasam. It's the waw of oath. Anytime you use this waw with any name or any noun, it becomes what? A qasam. Give me some examples from the Holy Quran. One najmi. Allah is taking an oath by the star. Wal asr. Allah is taking an oath by the asr. Was shams. See, that wow makes something an oath in the Arabic language. The Imam says, Wallahi, لو وجدته تزوج به النساء وملك به الإماء. The Imam says, I swear by Allah, if I come to find out that this money, this piece of property that Uthman had given to these people unjustly, and they had married women with that money, or they purchased slaves with that money, I would take it back. Let's stop a little bit here and examine the sentence and see what the Imam is saying. First of all, the word tuzawwaja. Can you say it? It's a little bit difficult to say it. Not tazawwaja. Tuzawwaja. Let's write this here. Tuzawwaja. If you're familiar with the Arabic language, tell me what kind of word is this? Passive. Do you know what passive means? Passive, the subject is not disclosed. Sometimes I tell you, Ali broke the door, or he's breaking the door. And sometimes I'll tell you, the door was broken. The food was eaten. See, the subject is not known. We don't know who ate the food. The food was eaten. That's passive. In Arabic, if you want to make a verb passive, you take the following form. It's originally fa'ala, such as akala. Akala means he ate. If you want to make this passive, keep the same three letters, change the vowels. Put a dhamma on the first letter, kasra on the second letter, and the last one stays a fatha. Fu'ila, ukila. Ukila. Akala, he ate. Ukila, it was eaten. You see how the Arabic language works and how you make something passive? Okay. The word that the Imam uses here is originally tazawwaja. And even before that it was zawaja. The Imam uses this form. Tazawwaja means what? He married. Tazawwaja. Zawaja means what? You marry someone off. Or you initiate a marriage with someone. That is zawaja. Now the Imam alayhi salam here is using the passive form tuzawwija. So what does it mean, given what we've described about the passive verb? Yes. Someone got married with this money. People got married with this money, using the passive form. Now the Imam notice here, because it's such a sensitive situation, why does the Imam alayhi salam use a passive form? Just tell us exactly what's going on, who did what, bring me names and subjects. Why do you think the Imam makes it a little bit vague linguistically? Remember, when did he give the sermon?
2 days after.
Right, the day after he received allegiance. And who is he referring to? Uthman. So why does the Imam keep it passive and kind of vague? If I come to know that from that money, the Imam doesn't even specifically tell us what the money is. From that money, people were married from that money, then I would take it back. Why does the Imam use vague language like that? Yes?
Maybe so that it doesn't become like personal.
Exactly. The Imam doesn't want to make it personal. If there's a revolution, Uthman has just been assassinated. The Imam doesn't want to make it about names. Uthman did this, and then the people of Uthman would be very offended, and then they accuse the Imam of killing him, and it's just not appropriate. So the Imam, because he wants to establish justice, he's looking at this very neutrally. If I find that money has been confiscated, and people even got married with that money, then I'll do the following, and I'll restore justice. See, the Imam wants to make it as impersonal as he could. And that's fascinating in the system of Imam Ali alayhi salam. Had it been any other ruler, believe me, he would have given you a full speech just condemning Uthman by name and making it personal. The Imam avoided that, even though Uthman oppressed Imam Ali alayhi salam, but the Imam doesn't make it personal. He doesn't even mention his name. See the beauty of the approach of Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam? Okay. Yes.
Could it also be like he didn't want a loophole to be in there? Like
He didn't want a loophole? Like what kind of loophole?
if you do it in a specific way, then people say, oh, you only said that. Then it wasn't like a general claim.
Yes, the Imam also wants to establish justice, so he's teaching everyone in all societies what justice is. And so he's giving a general statement over here. Yes, so people wouldn't limit it to this particular incident. So the Imam alayhi salam says, by Allah, even if I had found that by such money women have been married off or slave maids have been purchased, I would have returned it. Few discussions here. Why is it that the Imam alayhi salam mentions women being married and slaves being purchased? See, women being married, the Imam is referring to their dowries. Those men who married those women, how did they afford the dowry? The mahar. From that money which Uthman gave them unjustly. That's how they afforded the dowry. The Imam says, I'll take it back. Or those men purchased slave girls and they owned them and they legally were with them. I will take that back as well, because that money that was used to buy those girls, those slaves, is confiscated money.
So we'll take back the slaves and the
We'll comment on that. Why does the Imam mention these examples out of so many other examples. Remember those men who got those lands and money, they bought horses with it, they constructed homes with it, they bought silver and gold and food and clothing. All these things are examples of confiscated money. Out of all these examples, the Imam mentions women who got married and slave women who were purchased. Why these examples out of all these other examples? Yes?
Because it could be a possibility of starting basically a haram family.
Starting a haram family, yes, with the slave girls, that is the case. Because in Islamic law, if you buy a slave woman, right, and have children from her, but the money you used to buy her, that money was stolen money or haram money that you did not own, then technically she did not become lawful to you. So the children that you have from her are not so legitimate children. That's like stealing somebody's slave and sleeping with that slave. You know, the progeny there is not a halal progeny, right? Yes, that is the case with the slave girls. But why does the Imam mention this example?
It's hard also to break a marriage contract. I mean,
It's hard to break a marriage contract.
especially if it's a valid marriage between two people. I mean, you can return a land or you can return something.
Exactly. See, the Imam is making a statement that I am so committed to justice, I am willing to go that far. Even if that confiscated money turned into a dowry and resulted in a marriage, or it resulted in a slave being purchased, and now you have a family from that slave, I will take that back. That leaves no room for anybody to doubt that the other items, akid the Imam is going to take it from them. The horses, the lands, the silver, the gold, those are easily you can take them. Easily the Imam can command you to come and give it back to the public funds. So the Imam is mentioning like the worst case scenario, the most difficult scenario, to make it clear in everybody's minds that I swear by Allah, even if women were used to get married through this money or slaves purchased, I'll take that back. That leaves no room for anybody to doubt that. If you have property, belongings, you know, of course the Imam is going to take that from you if it was given to you unjustly. So this is the Imam's way of clearly demonstrating that justice will be served, no exceptions. Yes?
The thing that I was thinking of was, to tie off the brother's point, the verse from Surah An-Nur, وَآتُوهُم مِّن مَالِ اللَّهِ الَّذِي آتَاكُمْ. So this is money that Allah Himself has given, and Imam says, I won't even stop over there, I'll take that back if that was wrongly given.
Absolutely. That's a very good analogy over here. So the Imam alayhi salam is making it super clear that he's going to take that back. No exceptions. So those men, those dowries, come and give it back.
It's just the second part because it's nafil adli sa'a.
We'll talk about that. We'll get to that part. So these are the strong words of the Imam alayhi salam. A lot of people have been asking, a lot of members in the seminary in the past 2-3 weeks. In Islamic law we've had this discussion, references here as well. A lot of people have been asking about this idea of owning slave girls. I just want to briefly just give you some perspective on that, because I know it's a very sensitive issue. Some people find it objectionable. How does the Quran, sanction something like that? What exactly did it sanction? So very briefly, just to understand this whole concept of owning a slave in the religion of Islam at the time. Today, slavery does not exist anymore, but we're just trying to put some context to some of these statements. So the Quran mentions very clearly that a woman can become lawful to a man in 2 ways. Either marriage contract, whether permanent marriage or temporary marriage, there's a marriage contract. Or the second way is what? Slave. The Quran says, مَلَكَتْ أَيْمَانُكُمْ. What you possess. It's just an expression, what your right hand possesses. It's just an expression that what you possess. Now, this system of slavery, how can we quickly understand it and understand the justice of the religion of Islam? Remember, in Islam, you cannot just enslave somebody like that, just because you're powerful. That's something America did. They invaded African villages. They basically took those people as slaves, forced them into slavery and brought them here to work on the plantations in Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, and these other areas. Islam does not recognize this type of slavery. You can't just invade a village or like what ISIS did and say, okay, hey people, you're slaves, let's enslave you. That doesn't work. So how does slavery exist in Islam? Like come into existence or continue? One is if you're born to slave parents, then the offspring is also a slave. Parents who were legally slaves, then their offspring is also a slave. If both parents are slaves. If one of them is free, the offspring is free. But if both of them are slaves, the offspring is slaves. That's one way slavery can continue. The second way is in a just war authorized by the Prophet or the Imam. If the Muslims are attacked by the pagans, for instance, if the Muslims are attacked by the pagans, if the Muslims win that battle, they take the spoils of war as booties that they own, and also what? The women and children are enslaved. Question, why? What's the sin of these women and children? Very quick points here. Number one, this was a deterrent so people don't attack Medina. Because the people knew, look, if you wage this war against the Muslims, your women and children can get enslaved. Yeah, you may die, people might be willing to die, but you're not willing for your women and children to be enslaved. So that actually acted as a powerful deterrent for a lot of tribes. Had it not been for this deterrent, there would have been not 82 battles, maybe 820 battles. That's number one. Keep in mind this deterrence aspect. Number two, those women, let's say there's a village, a tribe around Medina. They attack the Prophet and the Muslims in the city of Medina. The men are killed in the battlefield. Normally in those times, in the absence of a state welfare system, what would happen to those women and children? Starvation. They would just be destroyed or raided by another tribe. Utter destruction. It was not viable or practical for them to stay in those villages when the men died. They were the breadwinners, they were the protectors of that village. If the men died in the battlefield, the women cannot survive there. So now Islam found it a responsibility. Okay, we need to do something about this. Let's bring these women and children into Muslim society healthy. Remember, this is the Prophet's time, justice. We're not talking about these evil rulers who came after the Prophet. We're talking about the justice of the Prophet. The justice of the Prophet ﷺ meant that these people would be treated humanely. Their rights would be given. They would not be abused. They would not be harassed. They would not be, physically abused, right? Now you bring them into a healthy society like Medina. Okay, question, practically speaking, who's going to take care of them? Who's willing to go out of way and sponsor all these widows of your enemies? Not just any widows. Practically speaking, if the Prophet brought 100 women from those villages who were going to perish, and he says, people, ya Muslimin, please come and take care of these women and children. Practically, how many of them would have been taken care of? Not many. That's just the reality. And look at the life of the Prophet with his companions, and you'll realize how many times the Prophet would ask them to do something good, 10% would step up to the plate, 20%. Because it's a responsibility. Practically speaking, they did not have the Prophet didn't have the resources himself to sponsor all of them. The Muslims, maybe 5%, they were willing to make that sacrifice. Right? You're obligated to spend on your family and children. Now spend on another family and children? Not many people are willing. So what was the only practical way at that time to take care of these women and children? What was the only practical way? Any ideas?
Take them as slaves.
Take them as slaves. Because now when you allow the families, the men, to take them as slaves, okay, there's an incentive there. We'll take them as slaves, they'll serve us. And then through that, the society in Medina hoped that these women and children would be educated in a society that believed in God, that believed in the Day of Judgment, believed in moral values. So that was a way to freely educate them, number one. Number two, Islam put a system to liberate them. That's why Islamic laws and hadiths are aimed at liberating slaves. So this was the only practical way. Take them as slaves initially, and once you take them as slaves, you care for them. Then Islam says, okay, now it's highly recommended, free them, free them, free them, give them their liberty, give them their liberty. So it was a way to transition their move to a healthy society, and then they would be liberated. And Islam did actually liberate millions of slaves through these hadiths and through these verses in the Quran. So this was a very practical method that Islam used at the time. It was the only really practical method. Any other method meant the destruction of these women and children. And remember, women and children were vulnerable. You just leave them like that in a village, they'll get raped, they'll get raided. Now when a family takes them, they become part of that family. Now they get protection from the master. Keep that in mind. It was protection, it was shelter, it was food, it was clothing, it was care for them. Yes, brother.
Was it like, it wasn't sued though, like it was not only like sued and like...
No, it wasn't just black, anyone. No, even sometimes some Romans would wage war on the Muslims and they would take those people as captives. No, it wasn't just black people from Abyssinia. It could be from anywhere. Any war that's unjustly waged against the Muslims and the Muslims win, they have the right to take them as slaves. Now here's the sensitive question. And today, people have a problem with this. Now that the master owns the slave, legally owns the slave, if the slave is single, meaning she's not married, previously married to another person, right? The master has what right, according to Quran and Hadith? Well, with a marriage contract? No. The master has the right to just treat her like his wife, to sleep with her. Now, today in the 21st century, we're trying to examine a law like that and trying to understand it. It's very tough for us to understand it, right? So let's give some quick context, just some quick context for us to kind of understand how is it that this was allowed at the time. See, when the religion of Islam allowed the master to be in that situation, it was actually for the well-being of the slave and for the interest of the slave. How? In fact, those slave girls wanted to be pregnant by the master. They wanted to become pregnant.
So their kids will be free.
First of all, slaves had a very low status in society. People treated them like animals, like second-class citizens. The minute she's pregnant and she has a child on the way from the master, she's now seen like his wife. She's no longer seen as a slave. She's now halfway to becoming free. People had respect for her. Oh, now you're going to give children to this person, so they would treat her differently. Socially, they would view her differently. So she would gain status, number one. Number two, legally, she was on her way to freedom. Because when you have a child from a free father, from a father who's not a slave, when that master dies, automatically, what happens to the wife, to the slave girl? She becomes free. In Islamic law, if a man has a child from a slave, the minute he dies, the child himself is free. But the mother of the child, upon the death of the master, becomes also free, if he had not freed her in his lifetime. Yes?
But the baby, يصير يعني ابن حلال.
البيبي ibn halal. If he legally owned her, that child is just like the child from a permanent wife. Same legal status. Ibn halal, there's no difference.
And pay halal money to buy her.
Yes, of course, if the halal money was used to buy her, and legally she was purchased, right? Then yes, that child is ibn halal 100%, according to Islamic law.
Some people in the Middle East, they have like khadam, and they think that she's a slave.
No. Today, domestic servants are not slaves. So if someone wants to have a child, it must be a marriage contract with her consent. If that's not happening, that child is illegitimate from that relationship. So in some parts maybe of the world, especially in some Gulf countries, right? You find that sometimes masters actually rape, those maids who work in their homes. This is an act of rape. It's zina in Islam. It's punishable. It's a severe offense. And the child that results from such a relationship is a haram child. It's not a legitimate child. This is different than the slaves that were legally owned. Today, this doesn't exist. These people are just working for a wage. They're not slaves that are owned. So in fact, the girls at the time, or the women at the time, they wanted to have a child from the master. And the religion of Islam allowed the master to have a child with her because that was a very quick way of giving her status in society, taking her out of that slave world, and also giving her her freedom. So this is very detailed, by the way. I just tried to summarize it as quickly as I could. But do you understand the context behind this law? Do you have any questions about it? Any objections? Yes.
The only way then at that time to become a slave is if you were a woman or a child from spoils of war?
Yes, spoils of war, but just war. Remember, not any war. A war that's authorized by the Prophet or an infallible Imam. A just war. Not any invasion war. Hey, let's go and invade this city and... No. The Ottomans, for many centuries, they did that. Even the Umayyads. They went to southern Europe and other places. They just raided villages. That's not acceptable in Islamic law. We're talking about a just war. And the wars of the Prophet were largely defensive. So they would be attacked by the pagans, and then yes, sometimes their women would be enslaved.
So Nabi Yusuf, when he was sold as a slave,
that's not real slavery because he was not a slave. They sold him to get rid of him. Otherwise, they recognized that he wasn't a slave. By the way, the Jewish law was different than Islamic law. In Jewish law, even in the Old Testament, if you look at some verses in the Old Testament, there were methods of enslavement that Islam did not recognize.
you couldn't purchase a slave in Islamic law.
In Islamic law, you can't just purchase someone and make him a slave. No, it doesn't work. But in Jewish law, if you were in debt to someone, let's say you come and you take $5,000 from me as a loan. The loan is due next year, let's say. It's due next year, October 1, 2020. If October 1, 2020 comes and you do not pay me that debt, according to Jewish law, what can I do? I can enslave you. I can take you as a slave. Islam abolished that. Islam did not recognize that as a type of valid enslavement. Another method, if you steal something from someone, you could take him as a slave. If you remember from the story of Prophet Yusuf ﷺ, when he planted that cup of the king in the belongings of his brother Binyamin, he asked his brothers, according to your Sharia, if somebody steals, what's the punishment? They said, if he steals, you get to keep him. Well, what does it mean you get to keep him? Becomes a slave. Of course, he didn't really become a slave. He just wanted to send a message to them, right? So in Jewish law, yes, that was a form of enslavement, but not in Islamic law. Islamic law does not recognize that this is a valid way. If someone doesn't pay you the loan, okay, there are some financial consequences, but the person does not become your slave. But in Jewish law, a person would become a slave. Yeah, it's in their scriptures, yes. I can show you the verses from the Old Testament. So yes, it's in their code of law.
So they invented those laws, or it comes from Nabi Musa?
Well, some of it may have been a divine law at the time, yes, with Bani Israel, to keep them in check, and because maybe people were borrowing money and not paying them, this was maybe a deterrent. Some of them they also added and changed. I can't really tell what was original, what they tampered with, but using the verse from Prophet Yusuf ﷺ, we can tell that stealing did have such a consequence. That if somebody stole something important like that, you get to keep him as a slave. Yes. To an extent, that did exist.
People might argue keep him as a slave is better than cut his hand.
Well, not really. Imagine if you're given the option, 70 years be a slave owned by someone, 50 years, 30 years. Or live free. Well, what did Patrick Henry state famously? Does anybody remember? We're not well versed in American history, huh? Give me liberty or give me death. Some people are willing to die and not to be enslaved or have their freedom confiscated. So yes, I mean, that punishment is severe because theft is a breach of security in society, with its conditions, of course. We're not talking about what some of these corrupt governments are doing today, right? We're talking about the actual law. It's much better, I don't want to say the word better, right? But being enslaved a lifetime, a lot of people find it much more difficult than, their fingers being cut, but having their freedom.
After more than 40 conditions.
After more than 40 conditions. Remember, there are more than 40 conditions for this verse of saying, cut their hands. More than 40 conditions. People take it out of context, and it was more of a deterrent. And some evil countries today, you see the whole royal family is stealing from the nation, and then a poor guy, he steals something, they want to cut his hand. That's not justice. So this is just a brief overview of kind of the system of slavery that existed. A lot of people had these questions, so I just wanted to clarify. So the Imam alayhi salam says that we have a serious issue here, and I'm going to return back that money. Now there are some who will feel uncomfortable. People who benefited all those years are definitely going to feel uncomfortable because now they lose privileges. They lose rights. The Imam mentions in the following passage, فَإِنَّ فِي الْعَدْلِ سَعَةٌ. The Imam says, don't think the justice I'm implementing is bad. The justice I'm implementing is actually healthy. It actually brings you sa'ah, relief. Justice brings you relief. Even those who benefited from those lands and that money, yes, now they have to give it back. But even that is good for them. Why? 4 reasons. First of all, those people, if they continue to keep that property, they're destroying their akhirah. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will punish them for that. They knew this was not the money of Uthman, and this was unjustly being taken. So the Imam is actually saving their hereafter. The Imam says justice is good for you. It's good for your hereafter. Give it back. You will be better off after you die on the day of judgment. A single dollar, my dear brothers and sisters, can hold us captive on the day of judgment. Hadiths describe this very vividly. On the day of judgment, you're walking towards paradise. Inshallah, it's our destination. Somebody stops you. Somebody tells you, look, back in the dunya, you took $100 from me unjustly, and you knew it. Give it back. I want it back now. The angels will stop you until you pay him back, then you'll enter paradise. Allah, where are you going to bring $100 from? Where? You don't have $100 to give that person back. The $100 is gone. That paper money evaporated. Right? This is the day of judgment. So the person says, okay, you don't have $100 to give me? Give me from your good deeds. Give me from your Salat al-Layl, from your Quran, from your charity, from your whatever. Give it to me. On the day of judgment, you need every single hasanah. And you see, every single hasanah is changing your status in paradise. The most difficult thing on that day is to give up some of your hasanat. So the person will take them. You'll move, you'll continue walking. Another person latches onto you. Hey, $50, you also have to give me. You keep giving your hasanat until the hadith states what happens with your hasanat. They're gone. But there are still people whom I violated. Yes, family members and inheritance, wife and dowry, business partners, you name it. People get themselves in trouble. Halal, haram money. Okay. The person comes to you, you say, Wallah. I don't know if you'll say Wallah on the day of judgment. Wallah, I don't have any more hasanat. What do you want from me? The person says, okay, I'll still negotiate a deal with you. What happens next? I have sins that are burdening me. So here, take my sins, they're on you. Brothers and sisters, the day of judgment is not a joke. Read Surah Al-Hujjah. إِنَّ زَلْزَلَةَ السَّاعَةِ شَيْءٌ عَظِيمٌ. Allah, the great King, is saying it's a serious matter. To the point where you see people acting drunk on the day of judgment due to the severity of that day. So when the Imam ﷺ says, look, I am helping you through my just government, give back that money that was stolen, that property that was confiscated, I am giving you relief. You see the relief for them on the day of judgment? That's number one. Number two.
It's a big wide range where you can apply justice. فَإِنَّ فِي الْعَدْلِ سَعَةٌ. Isn't that what it means?
Sa'a means something that is wide, right?
Yeah.
So when we say sa'at al-rizq, Allahumma wassa' alayya fi rizqi. What are we saying? Oh Allah, increase my justice. So the meaning of justice that brings you wideness, that's just an expression which means it brings you relief.
I thought it was saying like he can apply the justice in a wide range.
No. The Imam is saying that justice has a result that is wide, which means it has blessings, it has benefits. In other words, manfa'a. The Imam is saying justice comes with benefits for everyone. So that's the first way. The second way, that money which you have has no barakah and blessing in it. I'm saving you. You think you're using it, it's not going to give you quality of life. Your children will not have any barakah from that money. So justice will benefit you because it will bring you quality life. Number 3, you think you'll fully enjoy it? People who live a life knowing their money has been confiscated from the average citizen, you think they live comfortably? No. Because and that's why you see them isolating from society. They start living in this elite group, elite neighborhood, elite place, because they know that they can't be functional in society and live with everyone else. That's not a comfortable life. It's a superficial life. And number 4, there's always a danger. If people know that you've used your political connections in the previous corrupt government to get land and property and build fancy homes, well, there's always the risk that people are going to do what? There are people who are fed up with that. People who starve to death. They'll attack you. You are in danger. The Imam says, look, with justice, I give you all these types of relief. So even you people who benefited from that corruption, don't think my justice now is not beneficial for you. It is beneficial for you. So these are 4 ways we can understand that.
The person you took money from, same haq, he's not, he knows you, it wasn't,
yes,
if the money from him or not.
If the person did not know, Allah will forgive them. And Allah will convince that person to forgive you. Either by promising them forgiveness if they forgive you, or Allah will elevate their status on the Day of Judgment. See, for believers who had good intentions, they slipped, Allah will advocate on their behalf. But we're talking about people who were negligent and careless, and they knew they still broke the law. They have to face these consequences. Yes, if here you worked it out with someone and they forgave you genuinely, then yes, it's the burden is lifted. But remember, it has to be genuine. Why do I say the word genuine? Sometimes you took something from someone and then in front of people, do you really want those $1,000 back? And then the person is embarrassed to say yes, and al-ma'khudhi haya'an, kal-ma'khudhi ghasban. It has to be genuine forgiveness, not putting somebody on the spot or embarrassing them, or, I've seen people taking loans from one another and then after 2-3 years, way after the deadline, do you demand that money from me? He makes you in need and you're begging him and running after him. That's not right. You bring the money, humbly put it before that person, and then you may want to ask, for a request, right? Or hint that I'm struggling, whatever. See if the person will relieve you from it. But to put them on the spot is not acceptable in Islamic law.
So if you owe someone money and you die before giving him the money,
the inheritors, if they know about the debt, they have to take it from your inheritance and give it to that person. If they don't, and the person was negligent, then yes, they'll be held responsible for that.
As if her intention is to give it back.
Yeah, but I died.
Something happened.
Before the deadline or after the deadline?
Whatever.
No, it makes a difference.
Yeah.
If it's before the deadline, you have not done anything wrong.
Borrow money from somebody for a year, and before that year.
See, whenever you borrow money in Islamic law, you have to set a date.
Right.
You have to set a date, of course. I'm borrowing this money for a year, 2 years, 3 years. You have to set a date, definitely. Because then how do you resolve the debt? Right now, when you take a mortgage or a loan, isn't there a deadline? Of course, there's deadlines. So when you borrow money from one another, always you have to stipulate a deadline. Yes, brother.
What if, let's say, you're not able to pay back and that person won't forgive? What is supposed to do?
If you cannot, because you really cannot, right? Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commands the debtor to forgive you. وَإِن كَانَ ذُو عُسْرَةٍ فَنَظِرَةٌ إِلَى مَيْسَرَةٍ. If you really could not, then you're not liable.
They can make an installment, something.
Yeah, you can give some of it back. But someone, let's say they completely went broke. Yeah, that's fine. Allah will satisfy that other person. Then the Imam alayhi salam in this statement, and we conclude with this, he says, وَمَنْ ضَاقَ عَلَيْهِ الْعَدْلُ فَالْجَوْرُ عَلَيْهِ أَضْيَقُ. The most beautiful statement by Amir al-Mu'mineen about justice. Remember, the Imam is the voice of human justice, right? The Imam in this passage is describing justice. The Imam says, if justice is difficult for you, right? It makes you feel limited. It imposes limitations on you, less privileges, less special privileges for you. Then know that injustice is even more difficult. Such a beautiful statement from the most just leader after the Prophet that humanity has seen. If you think justice is hard, it's difficult, injustice is more difficult. Injustice is harder. Alaykum as-salam. How? See, temporarily, you might feel joy with injustice. You get more privileges, more money, more lands, but then there will be destruction. The end is a negative end. But even though justice limits you, it does not bring about destruction on you. In the end, it does serve you. In the end, it does help you. See? With justice, we think that it's denying us something. We want more, it's not letting us. We hate justice because we think we can get more without it. But this is the fallacy of the world. You think you'll be happier with injustice? No. Even those who are benefiting from the injustice, they're not really happier. Because justice ensures that what you get is what's beneficial for you. Anything that's not beneficial for you, you don't really need it. It becomes a curse on you. Anything more is harmful to you. Think about that. We think we know how to become happy, but believe me, we don't. Once I was speaking to a person who was struggling from a disability. The person was going through depression, through difficult times. He mentioned something. He told me, say it. If Allah just heals me from this disability, if this thing only will be fulfilled for me, I will be happy for the rest of my life. Now, this person has the right to say that because they're suffering from a disability. But take that statement, I will be happy for the rest of my life. Do you think that is the case? I told this person, look, you have every right to ask Allah to heal you, and it's good to ask Allah for healing. But for you to say, if I get this right now, I'll be happy for life, allow me to say something. I know hundreds of people that don't have your disability. Physically, they're perfect, but they're suffering from depression that's worse than yours, and they're suicidal. How about that? Why? How come they didn't achieve that happiness? See, they don't have the disability that you have. What guarantees you that you'll be happy? Yes, ask Allah to heal you, no problem. But what is it that's guaranteeing you that you're going to be happy? When all these other people, they don't have the disability, they have exactly what you want, a good, a healthy body, right? They have what you want, but they're not happy. So what does that tell you about happiness? The same ideas apply to justice. You think injustice, getting more, benefiting more is going to make you happy. It's not. It's not going to make you happy. Justice, fulfilling the law of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will make you happy. And when you sleep at night, knowing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave you your right, you will feel satisfied. Try it. You know, if on certain days you violated someone, at night, how do you sleep? But on days knowing you fulfilled your rights, you didn't confiscate anybody's right, you did not violate anyone's right, you sleep, you're at peace with yourself. You're at peace with your heart. So the Imam says, if you think justice is hard on you, believe me, injustice is much harder. If only people knew this golden rule, wallahi. If only rulers around the world knew this. And they paid attention to this amazing word by Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam. The world would really, really be different. And if you want evidence in God's law that justice is beneficial, look at the natural physical world. The physical world that we live in, it's based on justice. Everything gets its share in the universe, plays its role in the universe. Do you see any object in this universe deviating and trying to get more from another object? If the sun were to do that, if the moon were to do that, if the oceans were to do that, the earth would do that, we would not have a proper system. See, the justice of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is even evident in the natural world. Why is the natural world perfect, impeccable? The rotation of the sun, the rotation of the earth, oxygen, everything out there is perfect for life. Perfect for life. Why? Because it's based on justice. Imagine if these objects would compete with one another, trying to take more resources. Would we have a functional universe? The reason why the universe is functioning is because everything is in its place. And that's justice. You take your place. That's justice. That's a reminder for humanity. The minute you deviate from justice, you have corruption, you have destruction, you have all sorts of problems. And Allah mentions this in the Holy Quran, in Surah Al-Rum. ظهر الفساد في البر والبحر بما كسبت أيدي الناس. Allah says corruption is widespread on earth and on sea. What type of corruption is the Quran referring to here?
It's the injustice
Natural imbalances.
of the people.
Natural imbalance. The Quran is not talking about corruption in terms of like sins, in terms of moral corruption. Because back then, corruption at sea, what did that mean, you know? People didn't have these big cruises to go and engage in corruption and drinking and music and dancing, right? When the Quran says corruption is widespread on land, on sea, it's talking about environmental corruption. Bima kasabat aydin nas, because of what people do. Wars, destruction of the environment, poisoning the environment. You see corruption. Because you take things from their just path. Yes.
Can we understand this also with the hadith where even a lion won't eat a sheep in the time of the Imam when he reappears? That would also be considered a type of injustice in the natural balance?
Absolutely. We do have hadiths that justice will be so prevalent at the time of the Mahdi Ajjalallahu Ta'ala Farajah, such that even wild animals will not act aggressively with each other. There will be peace to that level. Because Allah will reveal His justice in such an impeccable way that even these animals, there would be no reason for them to prey on one another. So that perfect natural balance will be restored at the time of the Imam alayhi salam. Yes, God could restore that now, but humanity doesn't deserve it yet. Allah still wants us to learn. At the time of the Imam, Allah will bring global relief, and natural balance, even in the animals, will be restored, absolutely. And even, the climate. The hadith states, the Middle East, which is now a desert, a woman will walk from Iraq to Syria, or from Sham to Iraq, and it's all, first of all, it's safe. Number two, it's all green. Because people, through their sins, they can affect the balance of weather, climate, and the environment. And the hadith beautifully sums it up, بِالْعَدْلِ قَامَتِ السَّمَاوَاتُ وَالْأَرْضِ. It's through justice that the heavens and the earth stand today. And they are in perfect orbit. So we find the Imam alayhi salam really giving us a beautiful lesson in justice. Remember, justice brings you relief. Number two, if you think injustice is hard on who? For those people who want more, who want the connections, the privileges, right? If you think it's hard on you to just be like everybody else, injustice is harder on you. The consequences of injustice is even harder on you. So the Imam alayhi salam issued this statement just to let the world know how just his government will be. And then the Imam alayhi salam also commanded that all the weapons of Uthman that he used to fight the Muslims, his armor, his valuables, to be returned to public funds. Finally, Amr ibn al-As, when he had heard about the Imam's new policies, he wrote a letter to Muawiyah. He told him, Muawiyah, get ready. Ali ibn Abi Talib, with the type of justice he wants to implement, he's going to strip you to the bare bone. Because all of what you have, Muawiyah, is confiscated from people. It's not something that you justly acquired. So get ready. And this was the main reason why Muawiyah fought Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam, because he realized the justice of Ali is going to take him away, is going to take away all those royalties that he had, the royal possessions that he had. And he wanted to keep them, so it was personal. Imam Ali, when he fought Muawiyah, it was not personal. It was forgotten justice. But Muawiyah, when he fought against Imam Ali, it was personal, because he wanted to keep all those possessions. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وآله الطاهرين. Any questions?